Their work aims to inspire continuous dialogue, learning, action, and connection to achieve racial equity. Next, we have LaShonda Godwin, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She attended Southern Connecticut State University, where she received a Bachelor's of Science in Social Work, and the University of Maryland School of Social Work. She attained her Master of Social Work degree. Mrs. Godwin has received professional training in racial equity and healing, anti-oppression and liberatory practices, trauma-responsive, and social justice frameworks. Next, we had Tiara Sidnor Diggs. Diggs is a licensed clinical social worker and the co-director of Keys of Hope Consultants, LLC. She serves as an adjunct professor for the University of Maryland School of Social Work and is a certified restorative practices practitioner. Tiara has over 18 years of experience providing direct and indirect clinical and macro services to children, families, and communities. Tiara's most enjoyable role is being a mom to 2 awesome boys. Next, we have Vernell Mitchell-Hawkins. She serves as Baltimore County 4-H educator with the University of Maryland Extension. Before joining UME, Vernell was a public school teacher for grades 6 through 12. Vernell has a natural passion for science and agriculture. She works to empower all youth to be lifelong learners that are positive and productive members of society. And next, we have Sheena Hill, who is a psychotherapist in private practice at Parenting Works. As a responsive parenting coach, she offers education and support for parents and professionals who seek to move beyond rewards and consequences to deepen their understanding of development and attachment while masterfully applying concrete skills in emotional intelligence, limit setting, and play. She's a passionate advocate for anti-racism and helps families have authentic conversations. She lives in Baltimore with her 2 children, enjoys hiking on local trails, and has never met a pie she didn't like. I too have never met a pie that I didn't like. And finally, we have Christine Camp. She has worked with families with children ages birth to 5 in libraries for the past 15 years. For the last 10, she has been the Storyville coordinator at the Woodlawn Library. She has a Master of Library Science from the University of Maryland with a specialization in diversity and inclusion. So welcome to all of our presenters. We are going to get started, kick it off with a presentation from BRJA.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Dewberry from BRJA. I'm a facilitator there, and I also coordinate our 13th of the month events, which we have every month on the 13th, and they're open to the public. So we're going to kind of jump right in. So as we start this discussion, which can be a difficult thing to kind of think about when we think about race and we think about talking to our children about race, and we kind of wanted you all to reflect on what you were taught about race as a child. So think about the messages that you received about race as a child. Ted, could we go to the next slide, please? Things that adults said to you, things maybe you got from the media, things other children said, nonverbal messages, your environment. So just take a few deep breaths, just get reflective and kind of think about things that you were taught about race as a child. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go ahead and share a few things that were taught to me as a child about race. So one thing that I want us to be thinking about is that children are getting messages about race. Whether we explicitly sit down and have conversations with them, they're always getting messages about race from us, from the things we say or don't say, from the media, things like that. So I would say for me personally, growing up in my home, my parents, you know, I would say I was born in '78, so I'm aging myself here, but I would say that my parents, you know, even then, that they did a really good job about finding toys and dolls that were Black. I would say that was always a thing they were very cognizant and intentional about. And so for me, I feel like the messages that I got from them was like, yes, we're Black, yes, we're different, but that is a thing, that is a source of pride. So that's a thing that I was definitely told by them at a young age, and that was some of the messages I received. As I got older, those messages kind of changed, but I would say, you know, as a young child, those were kind of the messages that I got. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Rebecca, and she's gonna share a few messages that she also received as a child.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm Rebecca, and I identify as white, and I grew up in a white, liberal, middle-class family. And I would say that my parents, when they were talking about race, they were very silent about race, sort of about our identity as white folks. But when they talked about race, and specifically when they talked about racism, they very much gave me a message that racism was something that had happened in the past. So they would cite things like slavery and segregation and things like that. And then they also would talk about racism as being sort of things that, like individual acts of discrimination and bigotry and hate. And so sort of thinking about white supremacist organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan, which was active in rural Pennsylvania, close to where we were. And so that was sort of their touchstone when we were talking about race and racism, was thinking about especially racism as something in the past and as something that individual people did. If you were doing things that were racist, you were a bad person. So don't do racist things, don't be a bad person. And that was very much the message that I received. So we find it's very important for us to think about the ways that the messages that we received as kids, because whether we are consciously aware of them or not, these messages affect us and influence the ways that we talk to our kids about race and racism. And so what we heard adults saying, what we heard kids saying, the nonverbal messages that we got, if, for example, so my parents would talk about equality, but if we were going into a neighborhood where there were a lot of Black families, the car doors might be locked. That's a nonverbal message that was sending me messages about race as a child. Your environment. I grew up in a majority white area, and that was again sending me messages about race. So all of those things come together. So we want to switch gears a little bit, and from thinking about what we received from our messages, and think for a second about what we have heard other people say about talking to kids about race. And Jude, can you go to the next slide, please? So we'd ask you to type messages into the chat. What messages have you heard about talking to children about race and racism? Things that you've heard other people say, things that you've said yourself about what it means to talk to kids about race and racism. And you can just throw those into the chat. Okay. Her hair is nappy. It doesn't matter. So hearing conversations, hearing words that are racialized. It doesn't matter. And I can see that being interpreted in a couple of different ways, such as it doesn't matter if we talk to kids about race, or race doesn't matter to children. Those are things that I've heard people say. Children learn about race as early as the age of 3. Yeah, there's a lot of research out about that. We're all the same, I don't see differences. Race doesn't matter, yes. So that's a common thing, is race doesn't matter, or the idea that kids don't see race, which we know from research is not true. The idea of color blindness, which is related to the idea that we shouldn't see race or kids don't see race. Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of different things that we hear, and some of these things we may agree with, and some of these things we may disagree with, but they're around us, and it's important for us to acknowledge them and to think about, are these messages that we agree with? Are these messages that are going to influence how we talk to our kids about race? Are these messages that we disagree with? Do we need to explicitly counter those messages? Are other adults in our kids' lives thinking those things? Are they thinking that it's important to raise kids colorblind? And so if that's happening, what does that mean about the conversations that we're having with our kids and the conversations that we're having with other adults in that way? We could keep on talking about messages. There's lots of different messages, but I'm going to turn it over to Michelle actually to talk a little bit about this idea of colorblindness and how that relates to talking to kids about race.
Thank you, Rebecca. Excuse me, everyone. Jude, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Okay, so actually our next slide was about color blindness. I'm not sure why the wording's not showing up, but I will read it for everyone. Rebecca, are you able to put color blindness, the definition, in the chat?
Yeah, I can put it there. Just give me a second.
Okay, so Rebecca's gonna put the definition. So these are, BRJA, we take a lot of time and care around defining certain terms around talking about race as an organization. So this is, okay, it's up now. So this is BRJ's definition of colorblindness. And it's cool because a lot of people did put that in the chat, and we'd already planned on talking about it because, there's this misconception that children don't see race. Children are seeing race. Children understand, they can see, just like we can see, that people have different color skin tones. They're definitely picking up messages about race. They can see that race exists, right? So I'm going to read the definition for us real quickly. A conscious and intentional disregard of race and its impact on people in the U.S. An ideology that holds that race has no social, ideological, or political meaning or impact. Advocates of this often say that acknowledging race leads to divisiveness and is the equivalent of discrimination, right? But if we're going to be intentional about talking to our children about race, and the reason why it's important to be intentional is because we want to be raising children that are going to be anti-racist and going to be working towards dismantling this system of racism. And it wasn't put together by chance, right? Like, it was constructed over several generations in this country. And so it's going to take intentionality on our parts in order to dismantle it. So color blindness is very dangerous because it's dismissive. It's saying we don't see race, it's not a thing. It's actually pretty harmful to those of us who are people of color, right? So we want to kind of do away with this concept that children don't see race and that we shouldn't talk to them about race, but instead embrace the fact that they do. Embrace the fact that race is a huge part of life here in America. And I'll now turn it back over to Rebecca for the next term.
So the next term that we wanted to talk about is the term racism. And there's lots of different ways that people define racism, and oftentimes, especially in conversations between adults, it can get a little bit tricky, especially when people are having different definitions when they're using the word racism. And so to sort of look at this term and think about what it means is really important. And so BRJA has a specific way that we define racism, and it's a little bit different than the dictionary would define it. And Jude, can you go to the next slide, and that'll give us the definition. So this is how we define racism at Baltimore Racial Justice Action. In the United States, this is white racial prejudice plus discrimination, and is supported, on purpose or not, by institutional power used to ensure that one racial group has and maintains power and privilege over all others. In the US, it is the white race that has and maintains such power. People of any race can contribute to or act against this. So there's lots of things in this definition that BRJA uses of racism that is very different from, for example, the way that my parents taught me about racism, this sort of idea of individual bad actors who were doing sort of individual acts of discrimination. So I see things like the idea of purpose, that it's possible for racism to happen on purpose or not. The idea of power, that racism is very much about power and who has power and who is able to use power. The idea of privilege and who has privilege in society. In our society, it is the white race that has privilege. And that very much influences our conversations about race. I think someone in the chat talked about the fact that white folks have the privilege to not talk to their kids about race, whereas parents of color do not have that privilege. It's necessary to have those conversations. And then the idea that this goes beyond individuals. It goes into systems, it goes into institutions, it goes into policies. And kids are taking this in and they're trying to make sense of it with their brains. And they're, you know, they're kid brains and they're developing. And so, you know, for example, my kids who are 11 and 5, you know, we might be driving through Baltimore, and on our way to school, we go through, we live in Baltimore City, and so we go through Homeland, which is a majority white neighborhood and has very wealthy houses that are very well kept up. And then we also go through Southern Park Heights, which is a majority Black neighborhood and has houses that are row houses. They're smaller. A lot of them are sort of fallen into disrepair. And if I don't sort of unpack for my kids in their own language, in their own sort of at their own level, the policies of redlining, the policies of housing discrimination, the policies of over-policing, the policies of job discrimination, the idea of the racial wealth gap. If I don't unpack for my kids in their own words, all of those different things, then they're going to look at this majority Black neighborhood and this majority white neighborhood, and they're going to draw their own conclusions with their kid brains about what that means. And so having a sort of larger sense of what racism means and having those conversations with kids little by little over the years helps them to develop their own understanding of the ways that racism operates in the United States. All right. Michelle, would you like to add in some stuff?
Sure. Just to wrap up, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, that we're being intentional about how we talk to our children about race, that we're talking about how we're going to talk to them about it, because things cannot change in this country if we're not intentional about dismantling racism and white supremacy. So I just wanted to say I'm glad that we're all here and that we're having this conversation. One other thing that I wanted to add, that talking about kids about race can feel daunting. I think that it's important to do our own work as parents about, if you're white, it's about checking your privilege. It's about reading the books. It's about going to classes if you need to. Even for parents of color, it's about checking our own anti-racist thoughts, right? So it's important that we as parents do our own work so that when we have these conversations with our children, that we're doing it the best way possible, and doing it with the least harm. And I just want to say that even though talking about kids about race is difficult, I don't want, it's kind of like we have to have talks with our kids about sex too, right? It's uncomfortable, we don't want to do it, but it's necessary. And I think the way we should approach talking about race in the same way. You don't have that one talk about it, right? Like meet them on their level, have small conversations, work it into when you're playing with them, right? Like, don't see it as this one big conversation that you have to have, but small conversations throughout their lifetime. So I know it's daunting, but I'm glad that we're here and we're having this conversation and we're wanting to do it. And last point, just wanted to add too, is that, in your homes, be thinking about the books that you have in your home, the toys you have in your home. What messages are you sending about race by the protagonists of the books that you have in your house, your children's books? Are most of the characters white? Are they animals? Do you have books in your home with people of color in the books? So just that is a way that we're sending messages to our kids by the things we watch, the books we have in our homes, the toys we have in our homes. Okay, so that will end our presentation. Once again, I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Thank you so much, BRJA. We're going to move next to LaShonda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is LaShonda Godwin. Obviously, I am a Black woman. I am also the mom of 3 Black children. I am also married to a Black man. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker in Baltimore City, and I work primarily with Black folks. I work primarily with Black families in the city. And so that may seem a little odd to lead in and introduce myself based on my race and the race of others that I'm in relationship with. But I will say that I am joyfully and oftentimes painfully reminded about my Blackness. And it's just one aspect of my social identity that has been assigned to me by the nature of white supremacy. So today I'm going to make an attempt, and now I think I have about 4 minutes to share with you a Black perspective of talking to children about race and racism. So this conversation is called The Talk. And it's not about the birds and the bees. It's not about alcohol and drugs. Um, this is about a conversation that Black parents and caregivers have. It's about survival. It's about self-worth. It is about pain and struggle. It's also about dignity and pride and respect. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in 2017, Procter & Gamble started a campaign on race relations, and there were a series of commercials that were featured, and one of them was called The Talk, and it was a vignette of actors portraying Black moms having conversations with their children about racial bias. And so that was one of the efforts of the campaign. So this started in 2017. There was a lot of controversy around these series of commercials. And so they kind of resurfaced in 2020. And along with, there were also these activists, athletes, et cetera, weighing in on this topic called The Talk. And important about this for Black folks is that, and what I really want you to take away from this today is that Black people, and this has already been stated and shared, I want to end here, that they have to have this conversation. But while they feel that it is unfair, they also feel that it is necessary, that it is essential. For Black parents and caregivers, this conversation starts at a very early age. It continues through each developmental stage of their child's life, and it goes well into adulthood. Black parents and caregivers of all socioeconomic statuses are forced to really choose between safety over innocence as a determining factor for starting a conversation about race and racism with their children. And it's not just about starting, like having that first conversation with their children, but it's this decision making, you know, I don't want to take the innocence away from my child, but at the same time, safety is very imperative. So this happens not just the first time having a conversation, but each and every time this thought goes through Black parents' minds. And so in addition to that, and what is very important is that there's stress, there's fear, there's anxiety that is associated with racism for Black folks and Black parents and what they feel, and it's traumatic. And it can be transferred to their children and for generations. So as long as we are, as long as white parents and caregivers are not having these conversations with their children about race and racism, the consequences and cost of racism, you know, Black parents and caregivers will continue to have these conversations. So talking about racism with children should not be a conversation for Black folks only. There are consequences and a high price to pay for racism at everyone's expense. And so here's a couple of just thoughts that I have about assessing your readiness to have a discussion. And some of these things have already been said prior to my presentation. But really, it's get woke. You know, a lack of awareness that a conversation should be had is a privilege. And everyone, no matter what race you are, should have been impacted by racism in this country. Think about the things that you know. Take an analysis of your knowledge about Black folks. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who's an author, states that most of what we know doesn't come from firsthand experiences. It comes from secondhand information. So when talking about Black folks and their experiences, it doesn't begin with slavery, right? It shouldn't start there. So learn about other things that perpetuate a mindset of equity when having these conversations. Take action and have the conversation. If a distorted narrative of Black folks continues to go unchecked, then you become a bystander to racism. So, and it will persist for a long time, for hundreds of years, literally. Being here today is good, and showing up every day for the fight against racism is important. So hold yourself accountable. Ask yourself questions like, am I perpetuating or challenging negative messages about Black people? If I haven't been exposed to all things Black or some things Black, am I seeking to expand my knowledge for me and my children? Am I acknowledging my own prejudices and biases against Black people? And so this is all a process in closing. And it's lifelong, and becoming an ally. If you don't start this process with yourself, you're not going to be able to start this process. Your children won't be able to start this process, and you can't support them in that. So Tatum also says that unexamined prejudices of parents are passed on to their children. So we have to teach. We do end up teaching what we are taught. And if you want your children to become allies, then teach them to be that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, LaShonda. I think that's very important. Thanks for giving tips for parents on how they can kind of check and see if they're ready for the conversation, see if they've done the work themselves. So next we're going to hear from Tiara.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Tiara Sitnor Diggs. I am also a licensed clinical social worker. I identify too as a Black woman, and I am also the mother of two awesome young men, a 21-year-old in college, and then a very new fourth grader. And I also am the wife of an African-American man. And so this talk is not only just coming from a professional, my professional experience, but also from my personal experience of just being a Black woman in America, and then also just navigating these very courageous and sometimes difficult conversations as a mom. So you can begin my PowerPoint.
Sorry, which one was it?
Oh, no problem.
I have so many up here.
Well, while we're getting started, my first slide, again, is just an introduction of myself. So I am the co-owner of Keys of Hope Consultants. It's myself, and I have a business partner who's also a licensed clinical social worker. And we provide a lot of training, support, and consultation to groups, agencies, school systems, and pretty much anyone who is looking to enhance their skills when it comes to mental health, wellness, wholeness, and restorative practices. And one of the quotes that I have on my first slide that you'll see is that one of my favorite song lyrics is by Whitney Houston. I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. And one of the things that I truly think about and hold true in my heart is that our children are our future. And a part of the things that we can do as parents and guardians, because we know that sometimes we have a village raising our children, is that we are able to have discussions like this, so that at some point as a Black mom or other parents who are raising children of color, we don't necessarily have to keep having these discussions, because these discussions are happening across the board. And so I saw my slides. There they go.
Hey.
Okay, so you can skip to the story time one. Thank you. There you go. And so courageous conversations, the hardest discussions are some of the most important discussions that we will have with our children and will continue to have. And so for me, like I said, this is a professional standpoint, but also a personal standpoint. I remember the first time that I had to have the courageous conversation, or the talk that LaShonda and some of the other presenters have already shared. I had to have it with my oldest son. And I remember I remember feeling extremely heavy after I had this discussion with my son. And I also thought about that I never thought in my generation that I would have the same discussions that my grandparents were possibly having with their children and with their family members around how do you be great? How do you, have this great light that shines from you, but at the same time have to dim it simply because others may not like the color of your skin, or they may not understand the way you talk, or just not really understand the way that you just show up in the world, all because of racism. And again, it really broke my heart. And then to have to, again, have that same discussion that I had with my, now 21-year-old, now recently with my 9-year-old this year, especially with a lot of the major racial tensions that have come up. Again, it just kind of broke my heart yet again that I'm still continuing to have these courageous conversations, important conversations, but again, courageous conversations about, again, how do you protect yourself? How do you be great? But then also, how do you protect yourself being an African-American person in our society? And so as Ms. Godwin shared, is a discussion that is not only the responsibility of parents who are raising children of color, but then for every parent to have these discussions, because again, at some point, I hope that my grandchildren don't have to have these discussions with, my sons, because everyone is now having a discussion, and the children who are our future will have kind of gotten a better hold of kind of, this whole thing when it comes to being anti-racist. So you can go to the next slide. And so just some things that were kind of talked about before, if you already weren't aware, sometimes people, kind of aren't sure when to have these discussions, when is the appropriate time, or they kind of fear, if I kind of open up that jar, am I, going to plant some seeds that maybe you're not ready to plant in your child. But just according to research, as early as 6 months, a baby's brain can notice race-based differences. By ages 2 to 4, children can internalize racial bias. And then by age 12, many children become set in their beliefs. Parents, however, still have time to mold the learning process to decrease racial bias and improve cultural understanding. And so as early as possible, developmentally appropriately, of course, you do want to begin to start having discussions around diversity, equity, and all of those things. Again, you want to, of course, gauge the developmental level of your child. And of course, you know your child, and you know what they're able to take in and what may be a little bit too much for them based on their age and developmental style. But you do want to start as early, because again, just as young as 6 months old, the brain is already starting to conceptualize some of these differences. And if we're not having these discussions, or we're allowing other entities that they may be observing or experiencing, feed them information, then like I said, by the age of 12, sometimes they've already developed beliefs. And if we're not careful, they'll continue with some beliefs that can be very detrimental and hurtful to the society as a whole. So you can continue to the next slide. And so I wanted to just share some practical tips, again, as a clinician, as a therapist, and working with many children and families over the years. Parents are always questioning, how do you have these types of discussions, and how do you know if children are ready? So the first one would be to, of course, be aware of your own feelings and biases. And again, as many have stated, you have to check in how you feel about these things. And so making sure that, you've identified and addressed any implicit or explicit biases that you may hold, any internalized racial oppression that you may have, especially being a Black parent. There may be some things that you may still be dealing with, or some traumas or some memories or some experiences that can definitely have an impact on your discussion with your child. You can go to the next slide. Tip number 2, again, gauge your child's knowledge of what they already know and explore their feelings. So you'll be surprised at what your children know. Again, oftentimes, even when we think they're not listening, or they're not observing, or they're experiencing life as we know it, they kind of pick up a lot of things. And so you kind of just want to begin asking them questions. Do they know the difference of people, or have they had experiences at school or in some of their social circles, some of their activities? And then you kind of begin your discussion from there, and just continue to build. Next. Be proactive about helping your child build a positive awareness of diversity. They need to see color. When we see color, we see the whole person and can honor their experiences. And so again, we want to make sure that children do honor that some children's hair is different, their skin tone is different, the way they talk may be different, the way they dress, the way their culture, holds certain things to be true and valued, and letting them know that it's okay. We want to make sure that we do have these discussions, and it may be through books, it may be through experiences, and making sure that you're seeking out experiences so that they can see how other people live. Tip number 4, you can go to the next slide. Of course, be the change you want to see. Modeling is key. And so we know as a parent or as a guardian, we know that children do what? More of what we do opposed to what we say. And so they're always watching. And so we want to make sure that we're modeling, quote unquote, good behavior. And so that's down to the language we speak, how we treat people. When we drive through certain neighborhoods, are we, acting a certain way because we're around a certain type of people? When we're walking past people, like all of these things our children are watching. So we want to be sure that we are definitely modeling the type of behavior that are anti-racist as well for them, because again, they not only hear what we say, but they also do what we do as well. Tip number 5. Instill confidence in children of color and help non-children of color understand how to be an ally. And so again, as I shared through my own experiences and other experiences and talking to other parents, the discussion around talking about race is heavy. And it can be extremely heavy for parents raising children of color, because again, it's almost like you're sharing information about how great they are, how awesome they are. You're telling them about their history and how they come from all these wonderful people. But then we also have to have a discussion about, sometimes you have to dim your light. You can't wear certain stuff. Don't look a certain way. Don't be yourself. Don't be great. Don't be all of these things, simply because it's about safety. And so with having those heavy discussions, we also have to balance it with making sure that they feel confident within themselves, reminding them of who they are, reminding them that they are awesome, and it's not on them that people don't understand, and it's the responsibility of others to gain a better understanding and appreciation of who they are. And then for parents who are raising non-children of color, you really want to teach them how to be a true ally. What does it look like in the classroom or in social settings when you see something happening that is very racist or just inappropriate, or just not something that should be done, especially when it relates to racism, and really teaching them and giving them the skills and the confidence to be able to stand up. And tip number 6, which is the last tip, is about keeping the discussion going. Again, this shouldn't be just a one-time discussion. You should encourage your child to ask questions, share observation and experiences. Again, as parents, continue your own journey and be transparent about your journey. Be transparent that there are some things you may not have an answer to, but there are things that you have control within your own house, within your own village, exposing them to other people, making sure that you bring other people into your circle. And again, just making sure that this is just a continuum and just not a one-time thing. And you can go to the next slide. And then these are just some resources that I think will be shared out towards the end or at some point through an email. But again, just some helpful resources from different podcasts to different websites to different books that may be helpful in your journey with having this really courageous conversation. And then last but not least, next. This is how you can contact me. And again, I believe towards the end of this segment, you'll get all of this information as well. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. Resources and contact information for all panelists will come to you guys in a follow-up email at the end of this presentation. Okay, next we're going to hear from Vernell.
I was muted. Good morning, everyone. How are you? I'm hoping that everyone's good, getting a lot of information. My slides are green as a little hint. My name is Vernell Mitchell-Hawkins, and I'm a 4-H educator with Baltimore County 4-H, which is under the University of Maryland Extension umbrella. Our office is up in Cockeysville. What I wanted to share with you was a teeny bit about what we do for the community, and then kind of share one topic with you. And so my topic is, did I do that? I feel about like Steve Urkel a little bit here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So 4-H as an organization, if folks aren't familiar, is that little green clover down there in the corner. We've been around for about 100 years, and the focus is on developing youth that are positive and constructive and productive members of the community. And the focus is very intentional on mastery, independence, generosity, and belonging. So in the context of this conversation, I wanted to talk about belonging. But within 4-H, there are 100 different project areas that youth can work on. But today we're going to talk about some of the personal life skills that youth learn. We're going to talk about belonging. Next slide, please. I want you to look at, this is pictures from news articles from 2 different providers. And I want you to look at it really quickly. And what do you see? The one at the top, the caption says, "A young man walks through chest-deep flood water after looting a grocery store in New Orleans." This is in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Flood waters continue to rise in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina did extensive damage. The bottom one is a different picture, and it says, "2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area in New Orleans." So think about that. What do you see and how do you feel? If you want to throw something in the chat quickly, that'll be great. So I know you're still there and not folding laundry. Is the message the same? Are both sets of people doing the same thing? And is the reason behind the action the same? Different messages about intention. Yeah. Same thing, labeled differently. Someone is suggesting based on race. I'm saying suggesting. We don't know, right? Because we don't know the authors. If we can go to the next slide, please. But it does bring us to a conversation, although a very small one. And I apologize. I feel like all of our presenters have such great information. We could each talk an hour. But I just wanted to touch on bias as a topic for today. There's implicit and explicit bias. If you look at our little picture up there, implicit is when people unconsciously associate stereotypes or attitudes and beliefs and behaviors with a group of other people. And explicit bias is when people consciously associate these stereotypes, attitudes, and beliefs. And some of the other presenters have mentioned bias, and like when you go through certain neighborhoods, do you lock the door? Do you, pretend you don't see that person who's in the middle of the road, with their sign, looking for a cold bottle of water? So I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of time to really talk about bias and really examine for ourselves. And I know one of the other presenters had said, kind of check yourself and where are you in this situation? And it doesn't necessarily have to be based on race. I think we have biases on many different levels. Next slide, please. Now, same pictures are back up again. Do you feel the same way? And then I'm going back to say, do you think that the authors wrote the captions coming from a standpoint of an internal bias? Do you think it was an implicit or explicit? How do you feel about what you're seeing on the screen? And you can feel free to dump something in the chat if you'd like. And then as a parent, if this were the situation, what would you do? And one thing I've been kind of scribbling down notes, everybody's done such a great job, is that put yourself in their shoes. If you are, the hurricane just came, ravaged your home, ravaged your community, you've got nothing. You and your children, they need to eat. What are you gonna do? Which caption would be most appropriate for that situation? And I think that brings me to empathy, and that's just taking a moment to put yourself in another person's shoes. Take a moment just to see what it would be like. And I'm listening again to all of the presenters, and I myself, I'm a mother of 2 children, 2 who are teenagers, one who's like on the verge of getting a license, and is in college, and with all the things that are happening in our community, it's an amazing, but not in a good way. It's very emotional. And so sometimes I want to just tell people to say, imagine it's your child, that when they leave your home in the morning to go to school, you honestly are not convinced that they're coming back, and they're not coming back the same way. And this is what people live with. This is what people have to deal with. These are the conversations that we have to tell our kids. And it doesn't matter what your child's color is. They need to understand that there are some people who have a different reality from them. Next slide, please. I wanted to share with you quick little resources. So this, MTV recently did a piece on, it's called Look Different, and the resources will be shared with you, but there are several different tools in there. And one of them is a video, a documentary called White People. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting perspective. And there's some things that you can do to kind of look and check your own bias. Then the other piece on the other side is a resource that was newly authored by myself and some other faculty members across the country. And it's lesson plans where we can work with kids from all over and just kind of have these kind of conversations, and it kind of guides them through bias, Black Lives Matter, racism, white privilege. So these are some tools that we can use to work with our youth and our families. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time. And definitely my contact information will be shared if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much for now. Okay, next we're gonna move to Sheena. Sheena, I think you're muted. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was just talking. And Jude, if you're looking for my slides, they're orange, they're fall colors. So my name is Sheena Hill, and I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. My practice is called Parenting Works, and this is my 8th year in private practice, but I've been doing education and providing support exclusively for parents my whole career, so just about 15 years now. And we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Jude. So I don't want to talk about, repeat anything that's been shared already by our wonderful presenters. I just want to focus on a couple of main things, which are really my specialty. So since my background is neuroscience, what I help parents do a lot of the time is help kids really process and integrate lived experience. And even parents, we all have things that are stored as triggers or stored in a wonky way and not really processed fully. So the main things that I want to focus on today are not shutting down feelings and emotional work and curiosity in the form of questions and play. A lot of times I think parents are afraid to see, what comes up for kids, especially in conversations or in play, or even just with limit setting, right? Parents are really afraid of the emotional work that anything challenging is going to bring. Either they feel like they don't have the time to support the emotional work, or they just don't have the skills, or they might even feel like, talking about emotions or validating emotions is rewarding, behavior or reinforcing certain thoughts and feelings. So I really want to empower everybody who's here or who's listening to this presentation that you cannot be afraid of hard conversations or emotional work or curious questions, right? Genuine questions, even if they're hard for us as parents or as adults to address. We really don't want to avoid them. And this is something that we can help kids do through play. So we'll talk about that on my next slide. One of the things that I do with parents is help them use play therapeutically. So this is for practicing skills, for practicing and mastering emotional intelligence, for limit setting, for resetting the nervous system when there is some dysregulation or, you know, a lot of emotional work that comes up either for kids or for parents, right? Because play is great for us. Laughter is just as effective in resetting the nervous system as crying. And play is actually a really crucial tool for adults, because when you play with a child of any age, it actually synchronizes your brain with their brain. And so not only are you able to help them recover a little bit more easily and access, you know, some of that rational thinking brain so they can think clearly and have a conversation with you or talk about their feelings more accurately, but also it helps kids really feel understood and accepted unconditionally. It helps kids feel really loved and open, right? They're allowed to have some trust and know that they can come to you with their tough conversations, you know, with their questions, with the things that they are curious about. So I know it's been mentioned a lot about diverse toys and books, and that's a question that I got so much over the last couple of months. And so, you know, certainly we're a biracial family, so it's always a priority for us to have a lot of diversity in our playthings and literary materials in our home. But I always really emphasize, even if you are not in a multicultural family, you still need to have these materials and you need to use them. I think a lot of parents, you know, especially when there's something that happens in the world, right? They feel inspired, they go on Amazon, or maybe hopefully they go to a Black-owned bookstore and buy materials, and then they sit on the shelf because parents, again, don't know how to, thank you, parents don't know how to utilize them or have some of these conversations. So remember that play is really a #1 area where your kids are going to bring some of their stickiest stuff. So this might be, you know, things that they're talking about that make us uncomfortable, right? There might be some emotions or some feelings that are going on in play. And hopefully we've seen this with the pandemic. I know over the past few months, kids have been playing a lot about death and dying and losing things and, you know, just that unpredictability, right? And it really scares parents. So you might find that kids are bringing up things in their play that are indicative of trauma that they've experienced or that they've witnessed. You might even see them sort of working through some things, right? Having some exclusion or having jail or having protests, if that's something that you've been participating in or that you've been watching on the news or talking about. And a lot of times parents want to shut these things down. No, don't play about jail. Don't play about death and dying. Don't play about some of these scary things. And obviously you can always set limits where you need to, but as much as possible, I really want parents to lean into some of that play. And if it's bringing up stuff for you, then, you know, reach out to me and we can always talk about some of those triggers and really get to a place where it's not so upsetting. But we need to have some open space where it's possible for our kids to safely bring up some of those tricky things so that we can not only see where they are, but help do some of that manual sequencing to help them process. And again, this is such a huge topic, right? We could talk about it a lot. So I know my contact information will be there and we could always follow up later. I just have one more slide. Obviously, I've been, you know, doing this work with parents for a long time, but there's also some other amazing parenting professionals, some of whom I know personally, some of whom I just, you know, respect and follow. So I just wanted to make sure that these people were on your radar. Certainly Stacy Patton, who used to be here in Baltimore and used to write a lot for Baltimore publications. Her website and book is called Spare the Kids. Fabulous. Asada Kirkland is doing some really amazing work. Fair of the Free Child, who focuses on unschooling. Leslie, a friend of mine who is running Latinx Parenting, which is an amazing resource for Latinx families. And Leslie, and also Parenting Decolonized, which I'm not sure why is not on my list. They're really doing some pretty amazing things, helping families understand that things like punishment and behavior modification are tools, oppressive tools of colonization. And so that's a great resource if you want more information there. Also the Conscious Kid and Conscious Parenting Time, Chrissy's Couch, which also is not on my list for some reason. And then I think that's it for my list. So make sure that you follow these people, these professionals who really are wonderful and insightful. That I know they all have Instagram pages, Facebook pages. A lot of them have courses or materials that you can purchase so that you can get some of this information and begin to, apply it more in your family. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sheena. We can include this information in the resource email. Christine, we're going to end with you, BCPL's very own.
Thank you. And my slides are very bright yellow, and they have adorable baby book pictures on them. So I'm very quickly, hi, my name is Christine, and I work at the wonderful Woodlawn Library. I've been the Storyville coordinator there for the last 10 years, and I'm very quickly going to run through some of the library resources that you can use in supporting your talks with children about racism. All of these are free and available through the library. And all of these are also kind of with an anti-racism lens. So again, as we've already heard, it is never too early. As in everything with early childhood education, it's never too early to start. As we learn, by 6 months of age, babies do start to notice racial differences. And there's some studies that have even showed that they start to have racial preferences at this point. So a very developmentally appropriate and fun way to counteract this is reading board books with diverse baby faces. Babies love to look at other babies. Also, some of these books come with mirrors, so you can use that to start to talk about your own child's appearance and to build positive self-identity in your own child. And as a bonus, a lot of these books, they're also going to be learning social emotional skills and concepts like opposites, because they're going to be, a happy baby face, a sad baby face, etc. And again, with early childhood, it's also, as we already learned, important to model the behavior we want to see in our children. I put on there the link to the anti-racism book group for adults. There's one here at the library. It's starting next Tuesday, September 15th. Again, we need to do this work and model what we do that we want to see in our own children. Read anti-racism books and talk to your kids about what you're reading. And just as it's never too early to talk about this with our children, as parents, it's also never too late for us to fill the gaps in our own education. We're all lifelong learners, and there's many things that we never learned maybe coming up or that we have to unlearn. And we can do that alongside of our own children. Also, an important way to read diversely is we want to read books not only with diverse characters, but with a diversity of subjects and experiences. We don't want to fall into the danger of a single story. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop has a very famous maxim about children's books, saying that they need to be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. As we've already heard, mirrors represents all children being able to see themselves reflected in books. This is absolutely necessary. Representation is powerful, and it's necessary. It's necessary for all children to see themselves reflected. But conversely, if you are part of a group that always sees themselves reflected in children's books, you need windows to see into other viewpoints. You need the sliding glass doors to step into other lived experiences that are outside of your own. This is very necessary to build the empathy that we talked about before and to counteract the implicit bias that we learned starts as early as preschool. Reading diversely is necessary, and it's beneficial for all children. A good way to do this is to start with own voices stories. I know this sounds kind of obvious, but own voices stories are authors from a particular racial group or culture or ethnicity writing about their own
group. Again, this sounds obvious, but unfortunately it was not always the case, especially in children's publishing. A lot of children's books were written by authors of the majority culture about groups that they were not a part of. And this is obviously sometimes problematic, and it led to really having some inauthentic stories. So to get a very high quality, authentic stories and diverse stories, a good place to start with is the ALA Youth Media Awards. Now these include some things that you may have already heard of. For the non-library staff out there, they already include things like they give the Newbery Awards, they give the Caldecott Awards, but they also give the Coretta Scott King Award for books portraying, outstanding books portraying the African American experience for authors and illustrators. And this is for books from picture books all the way up through teen fiction. But there's also more. There's awards for portraying the Latino experience, the American Indian Youth Literature Award, there's the Asian Pacific Islander Award, there's books about, awards for portraying the Jewish American experience, for portraying the Arab American experience. It's important, again, that all children see themselves reflected and that other children read these stories as well. And although these other two awards aren't racial-based, there's also the Stonewall Book Award that you should be aware of, and also the Schneider Family Book Award, which talks about the disability experience for children. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a personal experience that I had over the summer with my kids. We can go to the next slide. So what happens if you want a book that doesn't yet exist? So for an example, I wanted a really high quality children's biography about Dr. Angela Davis to share with my kids. And she's been anthologized in some children's books, but I kind of wanted something meatier. A really important place that you can go for this information is our electronic resources, our databases that you have free access with your library card. So there's the biography database, there's the primary source and master file Premier. And these are good because they're vetted, they're high quality, but they're also appropriate for children. You'll see things on the articles like the Lexile level, and a lot of them will also have a read aloud feature for children if it's beyond their reading level. If you're curious about your own family's history, Ancestry and Heritage Quest, you can turn to those databases. And we can go to the next slide. We also have ProQuest, current and historic newspapers. And this is just something I particularly want to focus on that's available through that database, is we are very lucky to have access to the Baltimore Afro-American. The historic database has the access available from the year 1893 through the year 1988. Just to give you a wealth, just to kind of give you an example of the wealth of information that's there. You can see on the left-hand side, there's an article about Cab Calloway, talks about him growing up in Lauraville, going to Douglas High School. So it really has that local touch. On the right-hand side, I don't know if you can see this, and I promise if you're going to pull up this database at home, it'll be a lot easier to read and a lot clearer. But this is a letter to the editor. It's from the very first newspaper that we have available in the database. It's about the Chicago World's Fair and about how people of color are being excluded from participating in the Chicago World's Fair. And it's a solicitation for donations to write up pamphlets and to have those pamphlets translated into different languages. And I don't know if you can see who signed this letter to the editor in the Baltimore Afro-American, but it's submitted by Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells. So again, I really encourage you to browse through this database to read Black perspectives, both historic, and to think critically, have your kids think critically about why some things are covered in some newspapers and not in others, much as Vernell had said earlier. So we can go to the last slide. The library has more anti-racism programs coming up. We have anti-racism story times for the youngest kids. Our next one is on October 10th. But we also have anti-racism book clubs for older kids, for teens, and of course for parents that I mentioned before. And I just also wanted to mention that the situation and having us learn more virtually really gives us an opportunity, especially for us who live in more homogenous communities, especially white parents tend to live in predominantly white communities. Take this opportunity to step outside of your own bubble and try to develop cross-group friendships virtually. It gives us a chance to bump into people that we wouldn't normally be bumping into. This is such a great way to make friends that you may not have already done. There's plenty of opportunity to do things, no matter what your child's interests are. If it's Lego, if it's STEAM, if it's writing, if it's coding, we have those virtual programs available free through our website. I would encourage you to please take advantage of that. And then there's some other recommended resources there at the bottom that will also be sent out to you after the program is over. And I also want to say that a lot of them are to find diverse books to read with your children, but also always please ask the librarian. We love sharing our knowledge of books with you.